Hey, hey there, everybody. This is Eric Hale with Trader Oasis with a weekend update, a special episode, a follow-up to our most popular episode so far was the everything you needed to know about, or what traders need to know about GLP-1 agonists with Dr. Ari Blitz, who's a board certified expert and also he's a world-renowned cardiologist too, cardiac surgeon. So you saw the episode, maybe you didn't, but we've had some updates here that just happened, some timely stuff that just happened. Today's Sunday, the 10th of March, but there's a lot that's happened in the past week. And on Friday, Ari sent me an email pointing out some significant news with Novo Nordisk about a new application for Wegovy. And so let's just pick it up from there, Ari. Talk to me about what's happening. There's a lot to catch up on this week, and we could talk about Viking and all the other companies, but I want to talk about Novo Nordisk first.
Sure. So Novo Nordisk, just to set the stage, already has approval and was first comer on the scene to getting their GLP-1 agonist, semaglutide, to FDA approval and market for the indications of overweight or obesity. And that's been now being utilized in patients for a couple of years, and it's exploded. And Novo has also been experiencing the issues with trying to meet the demand, and so they've been trying to up-titrate on the supply. With that background, some very important news came out this week for Novo Nordisk. Earlier in the week on Thursday, Novo Nordisk actually released two important trial results, the top-line results. One of them was their amycretin trial. Amycretin is a weight loss drug that combines the GLP-1 agonist that Novo Nordisk already has and with an amylin agonist, and that's the combination of the name amycretin. And what they did is they released the phase 1 results, which showed at 12 weeks, so now we're talking about 3 months, a 13% average weight loss, which was a
I read that 13% in just 12 weeks, right? It's huge.
Yeah, it was remarkable. And even more remarkable was the fact that it was an oral drug that did that. So now, the market and the medical establishment views an oral drug as much more likely to disseminate as opposed to the sub-Q, which is the standard right now. That's what all the medications.
Sub-Q is a shot.
Yep,
right?
Sub-Q shot once a week. And so with the release of that information and the results of another trial where Novo Nordisk showed results that in HIV-positive patients, liver fat disease was much improved with a GLP-1 agonist. So both of those led to a catapulting of the Novo stock price in one day by 10%. And that was on Thursday. So into that setting, the next day, the FDA announced separately that it had extended the indications for semaglutide to include either overweight or obese patients who had a history of cardiovascular disease, because a study that had been released last fall showed that there was a 20% reduction in adverse cardiovascular events with the medication. So mind you, this is monumental because
this sounds big. So, but the market didn't, when that came out, it was right, the market was still open. You sent me the email on this and I said, wow, this sounds huge. But I didn't see the market, the stock didn't respond.
Well, it responded a bit. Remember what happened yesterday, right? The market was plummeting.
Okay.
And so was Novo. And Novo had gone down to a nadir. And as soon as this announcement came up, it started uptrending. And in fact, much of the uptrend continued after market close. Now, was it exaggerated? No, it was only about a 1% rise. So it wasn't anything that was monumental itself, but this was on the tails of the huge stock rise the previous day. And as of market close on Thursday, Novo Nordisk was overbought on the daily, on the weekly, and on the monthly. And you can see that on the chart. That's the daily, right?
Yes, daily. Yeah.
Yeah, so you can see on the day before, you see that little peak that went over into the overbought condition
Right.
on the RSI. And so already there was this, very large response. Now, I think the results of the FDA approval may take a while for the market to understand its significance. And its significance has a couple of components to it. One of them is that, after we meet the supply issue in terms of both Novo and Lilly meeting the ability to meet the market demand, the next big bottleneck is going to be the lack of insurance and Medicare coverage. And if any event is going to be more likely to cause both Medicare and the insurers to cover the weight loss medications, it's going to be a cardiovascular benefit. And moreover, remember, most weight loss medications are administered by primary care physicians, internists, who are managing, by and large, the obesity epidemic. Now we move into another degree of depth, because now cardiologists are going to be motivated to start their patients who have a BMI above 27 and have any cardiovascular disease. So,
Which is what?
essence,
That's got to be more than half of the people in the world, right?
yeah, and particularly if you're thinking about the overweight and obese segment, the incidence is going to be even higher. So this is a large population. If you think about it in terms of the overall market that is eligible for the medication, the pie has not changed in size, because these are already the patients that were candidates from before, the overweight, obesity. But what it's doing is enlarging the slice of pie that's going to be covered by insurers. And that's not going to happen overnight, but there is going to be a tremendous amount of push, because now cardiologists will be writing the prescriptions. And I will bet you that already underway are studies to measure the cost effectiveness, really, right? Because what the insurers are looking at is, am I going to make more money? Am I going to make less money? And the way they're going to make more money is if by treating the obesity or overweight status is going to reduce the adverse cardiovascular events, which will decrease a healthcare consumption on the patient's part. So that's the piece of the puzzle that I don't think the market has recognized yet.
You pointed out too in our last interview that there are other sort of things that happen, other somatic impacts that people are measuring. You talked about cardio, but there's other things that are related to metabolic health and other potential indicators that are there research going on in those other areas too? There must be.
Absolutely. And they're large studies, and they're advancing fairly rapidly. I think this year is going to be a record year for what we see with not just Lilly and Novo Nordisk, but other competing smaller companies who are coming to market with rivals that may equal or surpass the results from these two big companies. And we're going to see a whole slew of data from different phases of study, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. We're also going to see news about FDA approval. So liver fat is a big issue. And the most important part is hepatic steatosis, which is its technical name, can result in cirrhosis. It's one of the major contributors to cirrhosis that's not due to alcohol. And once you have cirrhosis, your lifespan is impaired considerably. And some of these agents are actually showing reversal of fibrosis, which is a big deal. And so those studies are going to come to light. We're going to see more studies about the cardiovascular benefits, because think about this. The study on the cardiovascular benefits, where we saw a 20% decrease in the morbidity and mortality of cardiovascular events, This was in the crowd that was overweight or obese, but think about where the next step might be, because in the study, interestingly, we saw salutary effects of the medication before any significant weight was lost. And that is huge, because that implies that there's other things going on with the pathway that the medication is affecting. One of the most promising thoughts is that it may be an anti-inflammatory effect. Once we have that, once we've got further evidence of that, it is a small leap to try to test this medication on the non-overweight population, right? Cardiologists are already treating patients for cholesterol, for hypertension, for diabetes. All of those things we know lower cardiac risk and extend life.
Mhm.
So now that obesity has entered the picture, and I think that there's going to be a big drive to look at patients, everyday patients with any evidence of cardiac risk factors, as to whether these medications improve their lot in life. And so, right, that's the pie getting bigger. So it's got a lot of moving pieces.
So I mean, we look at this equity, and on Friday I shared a trade that's rather a short-term trade that will benefit if the stock is very explosive. If the stock doesn't move, it's going to do okay. If it's moderately bullish, that I've got to kind of worry about that. I did a call ratio back spread. So I bought one long call, sold two calls at a higher, or no, I sold one call, bought two calls at a higher strike. So if the stock explodes to the upside, it'll do really well. I'm looking at the fundamental value of, depending on who you're talking about. Citi has a fundamental value of like 138, which is about where it's trading. And then Morningstar is at 84. I mean, it sounds to me like this might be more of a long-term thing. My sense on this is, and we're not providing any trading advice here, but if what you're saying is true, it's not in anything that I've read, because you and I both read the institutional stuff. You read the most recent Goldman Sachs report. The cardiac thing wasn't even mentioned in, the healthcare pulse that goes out once a week from Goldman Sachs. So this hasn't really made it out there. I wonder if your tip here is, is this really, is this before it's hit the market? I know you're very sensitive to this because you're a cardiac surgeon, have experience there, but my sense is like that the stock should explode. I mean, no
Yeah.
guarantees, but right. I mean, I did, you did mention, because the amycretin stuff on Thursday, it moved up a lot. But this opens a whole new pathway, and then also breaks down the barriers for insurance approval. That's been one of the big concerns about, as you mentioned, I think before we started recording, most of the people are looking at this sort of as a vanity thing or an aesthetic thing, people being fat. But there's real health effects that we've talked about before too. I don't know. What's your
Well, I
sense
think
about, what do you think? No stock prediction. I mean, no trading advice, but where would you put this in? And maybe we could talk about some other stuff, because Viking, since you talked about Viking, and this, like, the market listened, because Viking spiked right after we had our last podcast. And I think
I'd
if you'd have
like to
known that, you would have hit it harder, right? And Greg traded it. Greg did really well, and Vikings done really well since our last episode.
Yeah, so first of all, speaking to the market reaction to the news about the FDA approval regarding the cardiovascular benefits, I think you can view this in two different ways. If you think that the market is very efficient, the market may have already responded to the news from late last year when the study results were released. So you could say, well, the market was very efficient. They already knew about the cardiovascular benefits, and perhaps the market interpret that as a foregone conclusion that the FDA would extend the indication. So that's the more efficient hypothesis, right?
Okay.
And then you can look at it the other way and say the market's quite inefficient because it's a complicated area of medicine, because as we've gone through the scenario, you could see that it's several logical steps before you realize how important it is. And I think, on the very same day, one of the major cardiovascular business journals published an important piece about that, saying that this was going to be now in the armamentarium of cardiologists, not just the primary care, internal medicine, and obesity medicine doctors. So that's just touching it. Now that's got to sift through, because basically what we're saying is, all right, now cardiologists are going to prescribe. And so that's going to extend the number of prescriptions. Next, now the insurers are going to reevaluate, because quite frankly, they're not, magnanimous, right? This is business. And so they're going to start looking into that. Congress, which already had been debating for many, many years about whether to cover overweight or obesity drugs, which it prohibited 25 years ago, all those things are coming into play. And I think, as I mentioned to you before, the Medicare population, most of them are retirees. Most of them vote. So I think there's going to be a lot of movement, and there's a lot of ifs in that sequence. But to me, I think that this is very strong information. And I think eventually Novo's stock is going to manifest it. We're just not there yet. I think had Novo not made their announcements the day before, and had the market not plummeted on Friday, I think we may have seen something different. So I'll tell you what, the coming week is going to be interesting. Coming week should be interesting.
Yeah, if we had crystal balls, right? If we all could see the future, and we can't. But my sense is the stock probably. It just sounds to me like it's huge, and I objectively, it's not. Citi wrote a report about on Thursday about amycretin, but I haven't seen anything from any of the institutions talking about this. And maybe it just seems to me, if your hypothesis that it was priced in before when the original results, that we would have at least seen it mentioned. And I think it hasn't been mentioned yet. And over the weekend, people are probably reading these reports, and maybe some of the analysts, like you said, are having conversations with their doctor friends like we are right now, and saying, hey, wait a minute, this is actually a huge thing. So I'm looking at Novo and sort of reconfiguring my thought process on it. And maybe it's something, more along the lines, for instead of doing a short-term explosive trade, you could go buy calls right now, and maybe that's a good bet, or a vertical bull call spread is cheap, will do well if it explodes. I like trades that have more than one way out. And so the ratio back spread that I did, if the stock goes down, it is actually will make money. If it goes up a lot, I make money. If it goes up a little, what my adjustment is, I'm going to just buy the shares. But I'm wondering, just long term, if I should consider buying the shares, because the other company we talk about is Eli Lilly, right? So Eli Lilly has just been a juggernaut, going. I remember when it was trading the 400s, and then it pulled. I remember this pullback when it went from 467, and thinking, maybe we missed the boat. But sure enough, that stock is almost doubled. Well, it's more than doubled since this year. And I remember actually back in July, August, thinking this could be a $1,200 stock. And I look at this chart and say that's not too hard to imagine. And Eli Lilly's market cap now is 724. It's one of the largest market cap companies. I think it's about to pass. Is it Amazon? I mean, this is like number 4 in terms of market cap companies. It seems a little rich. But another.
Well, they're having discussions about it replacing Tesla in the Magnificent Seven, right?
Right. Well, I don't think there's an official committee on what's the Magnificent Seven, but certainly a couple of those names, Apple and Tesla, have fallen from grace. And I don't know. I think there's a place in your portfolio for either one of these. I like at Novo just because Novo Nordisk, because the price is a little bit more attainable. You're not looking at putting 77,000. I only buy lots of 100 shares, so it would take, not that I couldn't buy it, it just would be taking more of a significant position in my portfolio. And I'm hoping that Novo's the right. It'd be nice if Eli Lilly split.
Yeah, and Novo themselves split last year, so that's part of the reason why it's much more affordable. I think it was a 3-to-1, but the interesting thing is, if you look at Lilly, can you put back Lilly's chart? Yeah, So you can see what's happening with the consolidation recently. Now, Lilly has had a couple of bouts of bad news. Before this month, Lilly had most favored nation status, right? Because the results of not only tirzepatide were better than semaglutide, but its pipeline with retatrutide even, outdid both, because retatrutide had even better results. But that's only from a second phase study. The important thing here is also tirzepatide. Lilly had just found out on Friday, the FDA, sometimes I think the FDA likes to do like politicians do and release a whole bunch of information on a Friday.
Yeah,
So the
I
the
thought.
FDA released, Eli Lilly's other major drug is donanemab, which is an anti-Alzheimer's drug, and it had showed very favorable results in a study from the prior year. And all bets were on that would be FDA approved for Alzheimer's by the end of last year. Then the FDA delayed, and they were supposed to have a decision by first quarter of this year. And the FDA just announced that it's going to have to go to a special committee to review the results again. So that was a bad news for Lilly. Now Lilly took it in stride. I mean, and so it tells you how the market views Lilly. I mean, it's got a lot of resilience, and Novo, I think, was coming into this year was second place. And even though they were first comer and Eli Lilly was second comer, Eli's promising drug pipeline was looking more promising, but now Novo will challenge that. And it's a challenge for these companies, because remember, if we know that or hypothesize that tirzepatide has better results than semaglutide, in other words, Lilly's drug is better than Novo Nordisk's main drug, people would tend to want to be prescribed the tirzepatide, other things being equal. But now we have cardiovascular benefits. And even though tirzepatide, we don't have, it's an unanswered question, because right now the studies of whether tirzepatide lowers cardiovascular risk have not been completed yet, because they're a little behind. So this is going to be very interesting to see how it evolves. But I don't think you can count either one of them out, and their collective moat is so huge
Collective
that
moat between the two of them, right?
but yeah, the two of them together, the moat that they have, because the size that's required for them to be able to build factories and establish relationships to get more drug out is requiring a huge capital investment, and it takes time. You don't build a factory overnight. And so all these smaller companies are going to have a huge challenge, which we've discussed before, that more than likely they're going to be bought out either by these two companies or some of the other big pharma companies that have the capital that want to get in this space. I think Pfizer is one of them, and a few of the others that are very large that don't have really promising candidates in their pipeline.
Right. So we looked at Pfizer. We talked about Pfizer in the last episode together, and they have a GLP-1. So the GLP-1, just to review, that's glucagon-like peptides. These have all sorts of benefits. They're something very similar to those is naturally produced in your belly that affect various different hormones. You hear a lot about peptides. This is just a little bit of a curveball. I was reading I was going down the rabbit hole on one of those reports, and I think it might have been Zealand Pharmaceutical. I don't know if you know who they are, but I came across GLP-2
Yeah.
in agonists as well. What are GLP-2 agonists? What markets are those used for?
Well, it's the same. So they're being investigated for obesity as well. And there's GIP, and there are so many different hormones. And one thing that we're seeing that's a promising hypothesis is that the more different receptors that you're able to attack with these medications, perhaps the results will get better and better. Like amylin is not something that works on the brain. It actually works on the gut to increase your satiety. So that's why the amycretin results are exciting people. But you know, they're all these, and not only there's some paradoxical information where sometimes if you inhibit glucagon receptors versus stimulate, there are actually medicines in the pipeline that do either, that are both being investigated for their effects on weight loss. So there's so much yet to be uncovered and so much yet to be explored. And I have to tell you, I really do think that within the next several years, that these medications are going to compete very well with obesity surgery, which is the gold standard for weight loss. They're really approaching that fast, and so much so that volume of obesity surgery has gone down.
You know, I was doing some research, just GLP-1, and an article came up from 2 years ago on, I think it was CNBC, saying, hey, there's this new weight class, this new class of drugs that looks interesting. And this is 2 years ago, which is 2.5 years ago. We didn't even know you probably knew what GLP-1 inhibitors were, but nobody even, I mean, they weren't even on the radar 2.5 years ago. And it's, you know, it's the equivalent of everybody's heard of AI, and like every AI is taking a ton of mind share right now, but AI is real. And I am convinced this GLP-1 thing is, it is real. And you know, just from a safety standpoint, that these drugs aren't new. They've been around for 20 years. So there's a lot of history there, and a lot of reason to believe that these things are safe and effective. And you, on a personal level, I had my annual checkup with my doctor, and I asked him about it, and he says, I think they're great. If you're interested, you should try it. So he wrote me a prescription for Wegovy, which I don't know if I'm going to get approved or even going to move forward with it. It certainly depends on the cost, but I'm willing to take a crack at it anyways to see if it works. Because I have struggled personally to try and take off. I mean, if I lost 50 pounds, I'd be right in the middle of my healthy weight. 30 pounds would be ideal. But I work my ass off. I exercise 7 hours a week. I mean, I clock 7 hours a week physically exercising, and I don't eat junk. I don't eat candy bars. I don't eat anything sugary. I eat healthy proteins and fruits, and it's just it's really, really hard. I get it. So I think when some of these barriers, and you and I personally talked about it, that there's some shame and some stigma that might be associated with people. And I'm seeing more and more people, coming right out and saying, hey, I'm taking this thing. And I think there's a shift. Maybe it's a generational thing. Maybe it's the Gen X boomer mentality that doesn't want to admit it. But I think about my father, who had what could have been a TIA this week, and he's morbidly obese, and he's in his 80s. He could definitely benefit from. I would love to see him to be able to get approved to take this drug, because heart issues and all this other health stuff. I'm really excited about the forefront changing here. Are there so pivoting a little bit here, are there any other companies that we talked about last time about Viking Therapeutics, which had since we, here's where the podcast was, and then the market heard our podcast. That's not the reason why it went up, but you gave us a heads up on this one. I mentioned Zeal. Are there any other smaller companies that you're following, that you're looking at here?
Zeal is fantastic. That's also, I've been in Zeal for quite some time now. The way it trades on the American exchange, I think, is ZLDPF, or something along those lines.
I don't know. I tried. Yeah, it's Zealand Pharmaceutical, right?
Right, and it used to be ZEAL, but I think now it's trading on the American. Because the only way I was able to invest in it was through that the odd number of letters, ZL, maybe DPF or P. I know it's got those. Yeah, see what?
Yeah, ZLDPF.
That's it, ZLDPF. That's the way. And yeah, look up pull that chart up. See it.
Wow, there it is. Spike the same time that Viking did, huh?
Yep. And that because the information was released. And the other one that I had mentioned to you last week was Lex, LEX.
Oh, yes, Lex, right. You mentioned that way ahead of it.
Just before.
Every day it kept moving. I'm like, are you sure? Like, look at it. LEXX. Wow.
So Lex is interesting. So right, a lot of attention is on these pharma companies that are actually making the drugs, but a wise investor would also take a look at the other ones that feed into it, right? That are part of the supply chain or maybe become part of it. And what Lex does is it's a special capsule for the medication that will improve the tolerance to the oral medications. Many of the GLP-1 oral medications cause more GI upset than even the sub-Q version. And so this may be very promising because Lex is not only, so they already are in the midst or starting a study with the GLP-1 oral agents to see if we can achieve the same kind of weight loss with just sublingual absorption, which bypasses the gut.
Right.
And so they're very promising, but they're also well diversified because this kind of capsule can be used with almost any kind of oral medication.
That was my next question. So if
Yep.
it helps to increase the absorption, are there other applications for this thing?
Very wide, very wide. And that's why I think that's why I got interested in it. As soon I heard about it through the GLP-1, and then I was thinking, boy, if that's what it does, it improves not only the absorption, but the tolerability to the medication, and to lower the amount of drug that needed to be taken, right? It increases the efficiency of absorption. So it's got a lot of potential, but it's early stage. It's early stage. I always want to put that caveat there. And there are several others in the pipeline, but all the ones we've just mentioned are the ones that I think are the most promising right now. And I think Lilly and NVO, Novo Nordisk, cannot be discarded. While they've been around for a while and they've already had much of their market climb, their competitiveness is going to be the secret to their respective successes. Right? If Lilly was the only one that was out there, or if Novo was the only one that was out there, it's so far ahead that there wouldn't be much drive to reinvest capital to investigate new drugs and R&D expenses. But because these two are both competing with a market that's estimated to be 100 billion by 2030, they are both going after that. And so I think we're just going to all benefit from that competition.
Yeah, Novo Nordisk and Eli Lilly, you mentioned, have moats, which are going to make it difficult for other companies. And we did mention Pfizer here is struggling and not making much progress. My guess is that Pfizer is probably looking to acquire somebody if they can find something else. And maybe they look. So Zealand, when I did my research on Zealand, they came up as a GLP-2 company. And one of the things that struck me, so we're gonna no HIPAA laws here, right? But I can share whatever I want. I actually have shortened bowel syndrome, which isn't. When they call it a syndrome, it's like there's a mystery. There's no mystery as to why I have shortened bowel syndrome. I had a surgery and I had 18 inches of my intestine removed, and I struggle with being able to stay hydrated and absorb nutrients. So it's something I have to focus on. And Zealand's GLP-2 inhibitor is specifically designed, I guess, to help people out there.
And I think we're going to see also that in this scenario, the recipes for acquisition are incredibly large because all the ingredients are there to encourage acquisition because of the large moat, the capitalization of Novo, Lilly, and other would-be entrants into the market. I guarantee that we're going to have, I don't know who's going to be acquired. Rumors about VKTX being acquired have been lurking. Now, VKTX, interestingly, had a big drop after the results were released from the amycretin. And that was because just a couple of weeks before, VKTX had released their results. And so now all of a sudden it doesn't seem to be so far advanced. So, right, what's going to make it more promising as an acquisition, but a temporary setback, right? It's cheaper. So who knows what's going to happen? I think it's going to be very interesting.
Speaking more broadly too, this is um, from the institutional stuff research that I'm looking at is we're expecting a lot more acquisitions to take place in 2024, just broadly in all markets, that a lot of companies are going to be looking to acquire. So we should expect to see. You kind of had a dearth of mergers and acquisitions over the past few years, and we're starting to see that pivot and turn around a little bit. So sort of a different strategy. Usually when the company that's getting acquired, they usually go up and the acquiring company usually goes down. There's some interesting strategies there. And speaking of option strategies, like Greg shared a trade. He did a covered call on VKTX before the stock moved. And with the covered call, you sell a call and it puts a cap on your profits. And a lot of people who trade covered calls, when that happens, they feel, and I know Greg, I talked to Greg, he's like, damn, I should have done a different trade. I'm like, hey, you made money, you know, you defined your ROI ahead of time and you made that. And if the stock goes to 100 or 1,000, you make the same profit. I do know some folks who followed him said, hey, let's buy back that call and sell another one. And I'm going to tell you, those people who did that, this is just I'm not a big fan of rolling covered calls unless it makes financial sense, because you're gonna pay all that intrinsic value between 35 and $80. So you're gonna end up spending $45 to buy back that call. And your cost basis down here was 35, and now your cost basis is now 80, and then the stock pulls back and now you're losing money. If you just stayed in the original covered call, you'd be making that max profit. I always tell people, you should be prepared for an explosive move on a covered call, and if you're not okay with that, then do a different trade, or just do a covered call and buy a long call. You buy a long call too, do two trades that do well, or some other explosive trades. So this is one of those examples of once the move happens, people with covered calls feel like, oh man, I missed out, and I get it, especially if you look in your portfolio and you see this big green number next to your stock and a big red number next to your call. It makes you feel like you're losing money. You are not losing money, because you need to look at the two together. So that's just a option strategy I can add to the conversation here. But I don't want to take up too much of your Sunday, Ari, and I do want to get this out to the public so that we can hopefully get some attention on this. Um, I'm seriously going to look at doing more trades on Monday, I think, on Novo Nordisk. And I'm thinking I want to own stock longer term. So either a strategy buying the stock directly, or one that has me buying stock as a secondary exit, is probably what I'd be looking at. Do you have any other thoughts or any wisdom to share? I really appreciate you being here on
Yeah, no, and I agree with that strategy. The bulk of my investment is in the stock, because
Right.
I think the long-term promise is there. And so I shared in Greg's covered call, but that was, 2% of my stock. So I felt good. It was a nice return, but I also didn't feel bad, because and you always preach about this, which is great. But opportunity cost preys on the emotions.
It does. Yeah, I mean, when you find yourself getting too happy or too sad or upset or angry, that's a warning sign that your emotions are taking over. Seldom when we make emotional decisions are they good decisions. And emotion swings on both sides. That greed and that fear can both be powerful. So I think it's important that you do your due diligence, have a process, and then also be clear on your exit plan. So what am I going to do when this happens? What am I going to do when that happens? And then and pre-think that through that. There's a psychologist that I really like, Dr. Daniel Crosby, and he specializes in actually advisors, helping advisors who manage other people's money. But he talks about doing a pre-mortem, and that is think about everything bad that can happen, which is a a technique that counselors use when they're dealing with people in real life. So, people who get stressed out or have anxiety, let's talk about the situation. Let's talk about what could happen. What's the worst thing that can happen? That could get hit by a bus, or, my mom could pass away, or, okay, let's play that out. How does that work? And, you can get past the anxiety if you think about, the worst things that can happen. And I encourage people to do that with the stocks ahead of time. And then you can mitigate and hopefully have plans ahead of time. So Anyways,
Yeah,
I look forward to talking to you later on. I'm sure we'll talk later this week, Ari.
you got it, buddy. Good to see you.
Thank you very much. And hopefully
Anytime.
this helped people out, and we'll talk to y'all later.
Take
See ya.
care.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.